Mm.
All right, I have 10 o'clock, so I'll start in. Is everything good technology wise? Yep, okay. Good morning and welcome to 2021, A Transfer Odyssey. My name is Cheryl Dobson. Okay, here we go. My name is Cheryl Dobson and I am the Registrar at Missouri Southern State University. I have the pleasure of being the moderator for this presentation by my colleague at Southwest Baptist University. Before we get started, some virtual conference etiquette reminders are posted on the screen, so please pay attention to those, especially a few that I'll point out. Make sure you're on mute. I will try to monitor the chat as best as possible. And then there's also the video is being recorded and will be available after the conference at the links available here. And if you wish to engage through social media, you can see the information in the lower right area. So the presentation you're in right now is Goodbye Millennials, Hello Generation Z. And now I have the pleasure of introducing the session presenter, Dr. Dana Steward. Dana Steward started her career in education as a high school biology teacher. After earning a master's degree in educational administration, Steward served as a junior high and high school principal before making a move to higher education. Her 16 years at Southwest Baptist have centered around supporting first-year students as they make the transition to college. Steward has served as a faculty member, academic advisor, and the department chair for the Education and Theo Clark University Success Center. After earning her doctorate of education and educational leadership from the University of Missouri, Steward now serves as the assistant provost for general education and transition. In each role she has held in education, Steward has valued the relationships she forms with students and values understanding them and their perspective. Take it away, Dana.
All right. Can you guys hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay, great. Well, I just want to welcome everyone and thank you for joining us and being interested in this topic. I think, you know, in my years of education, and this is my 16th year in higher education, one of the things that I've learned over time is as I grow in my profession, in many ways, I feel like I become less and less connected to the students and understanding their sense of reality. And so I'm going to share a video in a little bit. Hopefully it will play okay. But the video is actually the inspiration for this session. I developed this presentation actually for the faculty at my institution and presented it about a year and a half ago. And just with the recognition that we do have a new generation of students. We often talk about millennials, but we are now dealing with Generation Z in higher education. And so what I want to do today is walk through kind of a background of the previous, I think there's 5 generations, and talk even about what implications those generations had in terms of how they preferred learning and maybe how that's impacted how we design higher education, and then look specifically at the characteristics of Generation Z and what implications there are for higher education based on their characteristics. And you're going to get a chance to also contribute to that because I certainly haven't developed a fully comprehensive list of the implications. So we'll jump in here. So the video I'm going to show is how to speak Gen Z. And if you're like me, there are moments in time when you're working with students where you think, I have no idea what you're talking about or where you're coming from. And so this video really helps to kind of demonstrate that, and it's funny. So, well, I keep hitting the wrong buttons. Let's see here. How do I get out of that? There we go. This will not be flawless.
Hello, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Carl. So it seems like every other week, the kids of Generation Z seem to come out with new slang terms that quite frankly confuse the rest of us older generations. So the goal today is to learn how to speak some of that Gen Z lingo. And joining me today on how to translate some phrases is our favorite spokesperson for the Gen Z kids, my cousin Brock. Say hello, Brock. Brock, say hello.
What's up?
Alright, let's get started.
You guys have the Wi-Fi password?
All right, Brock, we're gonna start with some simple ones. Yeah. Okay. Hello, how are you? Saw, friends, fine, family, fine John. It was a fun event. The fest was okay. Oh, I'm about to leave. I'm finna dip set. Those are some neat shoes. Them kicks are dripping. I would be glad to help. Bet my favorite team lost. Dude's took an L. My favorite team lost very bad. Dude's got clapped. He seems upset. He little mad. He seems very upset. He big mad. I like this music. That's a bop. I'm not lying. No cap. I'm sorry that happened to you. Oof. That's an interesting statement. Weird flex, but okay. I'm not a fan of these appetizers. These apps are beauty. I completely agree with that statement. Facts. I agree. Yeet. Excuse me. Yeet. Wow, that's exciting news. Yeet. Congratulations on your baby boy. Yeet. What does yeet even mean? Yeet is yeet. That doesn't help. It's like when fam comes slipping in with their dripping swag, jamming to some sick bop. And no cap, you know these facts are about to be litty fresh to death. You're like, oh. I'm not big mad at that big response. Yeet. I don't get it. Weird flex, but okay. I don't know.
Okay, so I showed this, like I said, to the faculty in my institution, and I work in the first year transition program, and there are faculty members serving as academic advisors for first year students. And it wasn't long after this that one of my advisors came to me and said, I was having a meeting with a student and asked them a question or made some kind of statement, and the student's response was yeet. And she was like, I wouldn't have known what that meant if it weren't for the video that you showed. And so, but I think, you know, this video demonstrates that there's just a different way of being for this current generation. And I hope what we can get out of this session is a better understanding of the generation and its perspective and needs. And so, so to start, like I mentioned, what I want to do is look at the previous generations. And so I want to encourage you, if you've done much research on generations, don't get caught up on the fact that the names may vary depending upon what research you look at. In fact, the inspiration for, or most of the information that I'm going to share today comes from a book by Dr. Jean Twenge that is called iGen, and then has a really long subtitle after that. And she doesn't call it Generation Z. She calls this current generation of college students iGen. And so, so don't get caught up on the names or even the years that are outlined. These are kind of, you know, symbolic. There's obviously, you could see research that has it a little bit different in terms of years, but very similar. And so when we think about the last 5 generations, including Generation Z, we have the silent generation. Those were born in 1928 to 1945-ish. And I would encourage you, as we're kind of talking through this, and we're going to look at some characteristics of these in a little bit, to think about people you know in that generation. Of course, the boomers, and the boomers are getting a lot of love, or maybe not so much love right now with the Generation Z, okay, boomer phrase. Gen X, so born from 65 to 1980, I am solidly in the middle of Generation X. And then we're pretty familiar with the Millennials. We've talked about that in higher education for several years prior. And then now to Generation Z. This graphic, which comes from the Pew Research Center, outlines Generation Z as starting around 1997. And one of the reasons for that they believe that the shift in generation happened is the release of the smartphone. And so when you think about this generation, born in 1997-ish, they have never known the world without the internet. And they've mostly held the internet in their hands their whole lives. So that's probably some of what's changed behavior, and changed perspective, which resulted in this new generation. a little bit of background information in terms of the previous generations. We won't spend a long time on this, but I think it will kind of serve as a foundation and framework for understanding even maybe how we designed higher education. So the silent generation, as we look at those individuals, and we're looking at people that would be in their 70s, 80s, 90s, that age group. The characteristics that they have, they're loyal, they respect authority, they are not about instant gratification, they are uncomfortable with conflict, and they're thorough and hardworking. And I think about this generation, my dad fell into this pretty much right in the middle of it, and this almost describes him to a T. And so you can probably think about people in your own lives that it's the same way. In terms of what it means for education is, as learners, they liked instructor-driven lectures, they like structure. I think a lot of how we do education is still centered around the learning preferences of the silent generation. We transition that into the boomers. We see more kind of team-oriented, service-oriented, this optimistic outlook, more about relationships and process, and then we see that reflected also in their learning behaviors. They like to have a role in the decision-making process in the classroom. They liked working together and like to experiment, but like to experiment independently. So still kind of this I'm independent, but I also like the collective, the shared role, and much more kind of about relationships in that sense. We moved into Gen X. I mentioned that I was, solidly in the middle of this, and we see some not as maybe positive traits here: cynical, a little bit jaded at times, more informal and casual, can be pretty direct, but also self-reliant. And so one of the things that I think is interesting as I've considered these generations is that, you think kind of about who parented Gen X. It was probably more of the silent generation and maybe the early boomers. And so we kind of start to see some of that silent generation affecting the perspective of Gen Xers as well. In terms of their learning preferences, they're more intrinsic in terms of their motivation. They view learning as independent. They want to be self-directed in activities that engage that, and even some individuality in how they complete their tasks. And so then we move to millennials. We're probably most familiar in terms of characteristics of millennials. I kind of think of millennials in my experience and working with them as like dreamers. They want to change the world, very, very much progressive and globally minded, confident and assertive. They want to be praised, but they also want supervision and structure, and less prepared to handle difficult situations compared to previous generations. In terms of the learning environment, they like participation in activities, but want grading and feedback individually, and also want technology integrated into the learning. So this is the first generation to kind of think about wanting technology to be a part of their learning experience. So we can see, I mentioned earlier that the silent generation, we probably see a lot of our educational structures revolve around that. But I know even in this is year 26 of education for me, even in that time for me, I've moved away from more instructor-driven lectures to more participation in activities and integrating technologies and things like that. So we see kind of the progression of how educational theory and pedagogy has been affected by the generations. So with that in mind, let's talk about in a little more detail the characteristics of Generation Z. So the first one that I want to highlight is that they are tech savvy. And I want to point out kind of some differences from what that means, because some of us that are not in Generation Z may consider ourselves tech savvy as well. I'm not one of those people, but I have colleagues and friends who are very, very capable with technology. The difference with Generation Z, because they've grown up with the internet literally in the palm of their hand, is that they don't just see technology as a tool. I see it as a way for me to help accomplish tasks and make life easier and communicate more effectively or more efficiently. Generation Z actually sees technology as an extension of who they are. So things even like their social media presence, their identity is solidly involved in that presence through technology. And so this has some implications. I'll talk about a few implications kind of as we go, but one of them is I think about in my own experience, probably 8 years ago teaching college, I would say to my students when we started class each semester, I want you to turn your cell phones off when you come in the classroom because I want you focused on what I'm doing. And over time, I started to see students almost look panicked about the idea of turning their cell phones off. And as we see Generation Z characteristics start to come through in our students, asking them to do something like that, where it's still not wrong to ask, it affects them differently than if somebody asked me to turn my cell phone off. And so because technology is an extension of who they are, in terms of usage, these are stats that are several years old. I think that it's probably safe to say these haven't decreased any over the last 7 or 8 years. But you can see there kind of a breakdown of how high school seniors between 2013 and 2015 spent their time. So 2.25 hours a day texting, 2 hours on the internet, 1.5 hours gaming, a half hour on video chat, 2 hours watching TV. That's a total of 7 hours a day. Although they're doing some what we would consider multitasking, where they're watching TV and they're texting. So it may not take up the whole day, but if you think about it in some ways, it's almost like a full-time job, just engaging in technology. And so it's important to understand this. The research shows that, and this is again from like 2015, that students check their phones a minimum of 80 times a day. And so, that it's an extension of who they are. They're highly engaged in it. This also affects whether or not they're sleeping, how they just engage in life in general. And this will kind of overlap in a little bit. I had the opportunity to go on a really fantastic vacation in the summer of 2019, thankfully, before COVID. And a good friend of mine, her extended family even, was going on a river cruise in Europe. And when they broke down how many rooms they would need, they had her niece with a room by herself. So they asked me if I wanted to come, and I got to be her niece's roommate. Her niece was 15 at the time. And so here we are touring Europe, these fantastic historical sites, just breathtaking views and cathedrals. And Abigail, her preference was to be in the room on her phone, chatting with her friends or playing games on her phone. And so it's just a different perspective. And I think that that's a relatively normal perspective for this generation. Another characteristic of Generation Z is they are diverse, and they're diverse in many ways. And so in terms of, race and ethnicity, 48% of this generation are of racial or ethnic minorities. That's a pretty significant increase from 39% with the Millennials. And so much more diverse racially and ethnically, socially diverse, a lot more engagement with, gender fluid or gender identities that vary. 35% know someone, that's probably higher now, but know someone who prefers the use of gender neutral pronouns. So they have a more diverse perspective and more diverse engagement in terms of when they engage with one another. They're considered educated. When we look at high school graduation rates and college enrollment rates, both of those things are higher than previous generations. And so we would say they're more educated, yet they actually spend less time doing homework and reading for pleasure. In fact, with the growth of smartphone use, there was pretty much a direct relationship with a decrease in reading for pleasure, especially among teenagers, high school and college age students. So one thing we'll see as we dig into more of these characteristics, and this is the first example, is there's some conflicting things happening with this generation. So they're technically more educated in terms of their credentials, but less engaged in their own education. And, working with college freshmen, I've seen this over the last few years, increasing even more. They're getting a college education so they can get a better job, but they actually, research shows, they don't view learning as important as what what previous generations did. And so kind of an interesting perspective again, in terms of just some unique characteristics there. They are delayed in maturity compared to previous generations. They haven't been given adult responsibilities, things like working. They're working less. They spend less time unsupervised with friends. They spend less time at home alone. Fewer are getting their driver's license at 16. And so that, obviously, I'm not an expert in this, but affects their brain development, their frontal cortex development is reduced. So their ability to make judgments and make good decisions is reduced compared to previous generations. They're also okay with staying dependent on parents. They see adulthood as something to delay or actually avoid. And so I was thinking about this as I was preparing for this, and I thought about a student that I knew, a college student I knew, that about 13 years ago, probably, that she was a student here. And she was sharing with me some things about her future. And she said, well, when I graduate, I'm going to go back home and live with my parents, because why wouldn't I? But she was still looking at getting a job. It was more about saving money for her, and that in the millennial perspective. The Generation Z really looks at it as, why do I want this additional responsibility? Being an adult does not look like fun. I would rather just be dependent upon my parents, let them manage my life and my money, those kinds of things. So it definitely takes that a step further in terms of their own maturity. This is another one that has that kind of juxtaposition. They're more connected, but less social, especially in person. So their connections are happening through technology. And so that's going to have some implications we'll see even in some other characteristics, I think, specifically underdeveloped social skills, at least compared to previous generations, and they're more lonely. So, again, it's interesting, they're more connected, but more lonely. And so it's a lack of meaningful connections that they're having. And, even though I mentioned that they're spending more time at home supervised, that's probably not even in the same room with others. A lot of time for teenagers and college age students is spent in their room, alone, connecting through technology. One of the characteristics of Generation Z, another one, is that they are practical. So where millennials tend to be more overconfident, very optimistic, the Generation Z is less of that, and actually even scores lower in narcissism, so have a very practical perspective. They're concerned about finances and money, so we see that play out in how they think about college and the cost of college. They want jobs that make money that they don't hate. Millennials were more about jobs that had an impact, that changed lives, that changed the world. The practicality of Generation Z shows through here with wanting to make money. They want to be able to provide for themselves or their family, and they just don't want to hate their job. And so it's not so much about the impact that they're having. They are less likely to take risks, both physically and emotionally. They really just crave safety. So we can see some of these things starting to kind of intertwine in terms of the characteristics of the delayed maturity, the less connected or less social, those kinds of things all then kind of coming together in terms of risk taking. And we also know if as those people in higher education, they certainly are struggling with mental health issues at kind of unprecedented rates. They are less satisfied with themselves, with their lives as a whole. Compared to previous generations, they're more depressed. They feel like their lives don't have value. And in 2016, the American Freshman Survey of entering college students showed that we were at all-time highs in every indicator of mental health. I would again, I'm going to guess that hasn't decreased. In fact, I would guess that that has increased even over the last 5 years. And so certainly have some strengths, but certainly also as a generation have some significant challenges that they need to overcome. And so as we kind of think about these things and this kind of summary of the characteristics of Generation Z, want to look at then what does it mean for us in higher education, for how we design our classes, for how we communicate with and interact with students. What implications does the characteristics of this generation have? And again, I mentioned this at the beginning. I'm going to share kind of 4 broad implications that I see. That's not comprehensive. So as we kind of get into that, I'll ask you guys to share implications that you see as well and kind of have a discussion about that. I think we're going to have plenty of time for that. So one of the implications is we need to be thoughtful about our use of technology. And so in multiple ways. And so you can see I've highlighted 2 ways, both in how we communicate with students and also how we design our classes. So I want to talk first about communication. As these students see technology as an extension of themselves, we know things like they don't talk on the phone as much. They don't answer phone calls as much. They prefer to text, those kinds of things. I, as an academic advisor, a faculty member, I don't have a university cell phone. I have only my personal cell phone. I've been resistant to text students because I'm giving out my personal cell phone number. COVID over the last year has kind of upended that a little bit because I was working from home. I only had my cell phone, and so I ended up texting students, and I found they don't abuse it, but they will respond. At least some of them will respond more quickly with a text message. So as institutions, I know there's a lot of technology out there where I think Outlook, we use Outlook at my institution, used to at least have a feature where you could text from Outlook. So even considering those kinds of opportunities for technology that exist so that you can connect with students at a way that's meaningful and efficient for them and practical for them. In terms of class design, we've had a crash course over the last year in using technology to deliver instruction. And so I think even from when I originally developed this, we've probably grown a lot in this. I think a couple of things to be cautious of with this generation is they recognize gimmicky very quickly. And so if you're using technology that's some kind of flashy kind of thing, but maybe doesn't have the practical application, it's just kind of cool, they don't necessarily love that, at least not for the long term. The other thing I would say is they know if you don't know how to really use technology. And so I think our role in higher education isn't just to say, well, my institution says I have to use this LMS or that LMS. So I'm going to kind of just have an idea, bare bones how to use it. Students are going to get really frustrated with you about that. They know when you don't know how to use it, you lose credibility if they recognize that. So we as educators need to invest in understanding how to effectively use technology and engage students with that. A second implication, when we think about how they interact socially, and that mainly being through technology, we recognize, that they struggle sometimes with how to relate socially, even how to communicate effectively. And so that could be both through technology. It could also be in the classroom or in individual advising meetings. And so, several examples I think about, we probably all have received email from students where it's from some personal address that's like Pretty Pony 2020. And they just say, hey, I need to drop a class. Can you help me? That's all it says. There might not even be any punctuation. And I don't know who Pretty Pony 2020 is. They didn't sign their name. There's no indicator of who they are. So then you have to email back and say, who are you? They may need instruction on even what seems to us like practical kinds of things. This was probably with a millennial, but I was in a Facebook message group with a group of I think they'd already graduated at that point for a short time. And they were students that I had connected with while they were here. And I can't remember why we were communicating. But when I communicated, and these were students who were graduates of our honors program, when I communicated with them, I communicated like I write, professionally. So I had complete sentences and punctuation and capitalized, appropriate words, those kinds of things. And one of the people in the group was like, yo, like, you don't have to talk like that to us. You can just like pretend you're texting. And I'm like, yeah, this is how I text people too. And so, obviously we can think about context with that, but I think helping our students recognize kind of the different audiences and the different formats of how to communicate. We may need to give more detailed instruction when we're doing group work in our classrooms about how to engage. Like I tend to tell my students and give them a minute or two when I put them in groups, and I just say, introduce yourselves. Tell where you're from, what your major is, why are you at SBU, And so it seems like, wouldn't they just do that? But they don't. And so I think we have to set up some structures to help them engage socially, to help them know how to interact appropriately with one another, because they don't have that background. A third implication would be, because they're so practical in their mindsets and their perspective, is to kind of capitalize on that in higher education. So thinking about this can be from the recruitment perspective to what we do in classes, to student services, those kinds of things. But I think in the classroom itself, theory is important, and I will advocate that, till the end of my life. It's important for them to understand theory. It's also important, especially with this practical approach, to consider what real life application looks like. And so, kind of the combination of the two is important, and giving them the opportunity also to engage in those kinds of real life experiences through internships and practicums and job shadowing and those kinds of things as well. I think that career services, I oversee our career services area at SBU. We are way behind the times on what we need to be doing with it, and we're working pretty rapidly to try to get caught up. But because students come into college and they're, on the whole, their main point for being in college is to get a better job. They're saying that from before they even start college. Then we need to make sure we have career services in place, helping them to identify the correct career pathways for them, for their interests, for their passions, for their abilities, and helping them then get engaged in developing themselves towards being effective in that career, or in careers in general, developing those soft skills, those kinds of things. And then I think as institutions, we have to demonstrate that there's a return on their investment. So how they're engaging now going to lead to returns in the future for them? I think that practicality, they desire that and want to see that. And then the last thing would be thinking about how we can support them. We talked about the fact that they're less mature, they're less healthy mentally. They actually desire more support. I think millennials, we saw a lot of growth in facilities in really neat kinds of opportunities and activities that we can engage millennials in. We've moved now to really needing much more support for students. And so thinking about how do we provide kind of centralized tutoring, mentoring, those kinds of things that students may need with that extra support. And then also, various mental health resources because of the kind of explosion of mental health issues on college campuses. So those are the kind of 4 broad implications I see. I'm interested in hearing other implications that you guys may see based on Generation Z, or questions you may have. I'm actually going to quit screen sharing so I can see the chat more effectively. But Cheryl, if you want to start to kind of go through that'd be great.
Sure. Yeah, I'd be glad to. I was and so that is more kind of implication as far as staffing and administration and the higher ups, so to speak. But one of our past university presidents made a comment. He has to, in order to get to his office, he has to go through a floor in which financial aid, bursar, admissions, and registrar are housed. And he made the comment once on resources that our offices were not busy because we didn't have lines out of our offices. And so it showed to me that, when we're talking and fighting for resources, we still have work to do in the office. It's just coming in an electronic format now. But he didn't quite understand that. And so, because we've transitioned, like you said, your career services area needs to really get caught up on stuff. So our office has done the same thing, transition from a lot of paper to electronic. So making sure your administration knows you're still servicing the students and, that way too. So anyway, I was just going to throw that incident out. It was kind of funny at our campus. Okay, some of the chats. Let's see here. Get down here. How do we help students develop more meaningful connections with each other, especially through the virtual format we find ourselves in? Yeah, especially now.
Yeah, I think that's a great question, and certainly one of the challenges of the times. I think I was with a group of people last night, most of whom are involved in higher education in some way, and all were college graduates. And we were talking about kind of memories of what college was like when we had snow like what we have right now. And one person was sharing how one of the men's dorms, there were like 35 guys that came over to one of the girls' dorms, and all the girls just heard was something hitting the outside wall, and they were all just throwing snowballs right at the dorm. And then it's like 30 or 40 girls rush outside, and they just have this like epic snowball fight. And someone else in the group, and this is a person whose sister is actually a current student at SBU, they said, yeah, they wouldn't do that now. And I was like, it just broke my heart because I thought, oh, that's so sad, And so I think it is a significant challenge. I think we have to be really intentional with this group of students about providing opportunities for them to connect. And whether that even means, in your classes, if you have the opportunity, just having a time outside of the regular class time where you meet virtually. Not requiring it, but just saying, hey, anybody who wants to, and you may have no one show up. I think, if you're a residential campus, then working with residence life and student activities and those types of things to try to provide not just things for students to go to or for them to do, but actually opportunities for them to engage with each other. For the commuter campuses, I think you have to be even more intentional than about that. And I think a lot of that is just building meaningful connections, whether that means, if you're a commuter campus, you're teaching your classes virtually right now, even setting up groups within your LMS, small groups where they can maybe get to know each other through that. But I think we just have to figure out intentional ways to have our students engage with each other. I noticed earlier someone said that they have a child, I think that's 21, and they talked about how the 2008 recession impacted the views of finances. I certainly think that the recession, Generation Z would have been, probably 10 years old or younger at that time. They grew up hearing parents struggle financially. I definitely think that impacted their practical perspective and their kind of that practical approach. They're wanting to get a good job, support themselves, those kinds of things. So I thought that was great insight.
Another one that I see here posted by Gavin O'Connor, it says, although Gen Zs are a big portion of our population, what are some ways to balance having all generations in the classroom and meeting everyone's needs? And I think you really hit on a point earlier that you said they don't read as much. Our student affairs book club read her book, and it was excellent. That was kind of an eye-opener. And there's a quote in here that says, they're teaching us the way they did 50 years ago, like you referred to the silent generation. Mm-hmm. And they said, we don't learn from books. That's not how we learn anymore. Mm-hmm. How do you do that?
Yeah, that's a great question. And hi, Gavin. I have students. It's been a couple years ago, the first time I had an advisee tell me how hard one class was because all their professor did was stand up there and lecture. And I wanted to be like, that was college for me, and but I think we have to make sure faculty and staff are mindful of the fact that we can't do a one size fits all. And we have to know for our own institution, what is our population? My institution is, at least on the Bolivar campus where I work, is primarily traditional aged college students. So we're primarily working with Generation Z. We talk about in my area, when we have the non-traditional student, we need to show some extra love to them because they're out of pocket in many ways. But I think understanding your own institution and the population of students you have, and Gavin, I know you're at OTC, and so you probably have a pretty good cross section of adult learners, with various ages and life experiences and life situations, along with the traditional age students. And so I think helping your faculty and staff understand kind of the needs of each of those, and then especially in the classroom, diversifying some instruction. And so making sure you're providing opportunities to engage in various ways, so that hopefully you're hitting on something that connects with each of the generations that you may have represented in the classroom. That's a great question.
I think we have time for maybe one or two more, but here's another one, and we definitely have this problem in our office. Has anyone noticed that students expect immediate responses regardless if it's 3 a.m. or 1 p.m.? They are so connected that I think they believe we are connected as employees 24/7. How do you combat that expectation? This is from Jennifer Richardson. Very true. I remember a student who called in a panic that we had not responded within, I'm kidding you not, within less than an hour. Yep. And he called 2 or 3 times. It's like, well, we were in a staff meeting. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. I think, we're seeing that more and more with just 24/7 services that are provided through banking industries and grocery and fast food and all those kinds of things. And so I think what we have to do is set expectation. I think we have to communicate that clearly, in that we can say we recognize you may be operating on a different time frame than what I am. I even tell my students in my classroom, like, if you have a question, email me, but I don't check my email after 8 p.m. So if you think you might have a question about the homework, you better start on it before 8 p.m. or whatever time. And so I think we just have to communicate that up front to students and try to make them aware that we're not available 24/7. That's not how most institutions operate, at least, not not all of the services anyway. And so, and just kind of set that expectation, maybe even starting with things like orientation, those kinds of things, beginning to express that, there's operating hours and we want to answer your questions. But, those have to be given to us in a timely manner, and have some patience, maybe even as an institution have some guidelines that we're going to respond to emails within 24 hours or something like that. So where, besides weekends, maybe during the weekday, but kind of, express that and share that up front so that there's an understanding of that. I think that can be helpful. It's not going to change. Some students are still going to feel like you didn't respond, and, my assignment was due at 7 a.m. and I emailed you at 3 a.m. about it. And what was I supposed to do? Well, my mind would be you're supposed to work on it before 3 a.m., but that's just not how they operate. And so that's lessons for them to learn, though, in terms of self-management and communication. So
lessons for them to learn, in the big world there. One last question. I don't see any other posts, so I'm going to add on mental health. The book devoted a whole entire chapter, and I agree with it 100%. I think we're headed for a crisis. It talks about the iPhone or the smartphone being, I should correct myself, really kind of detrimental to the population. What has your institution done to move forward or to prepare for that? I think we've got a bigger crisis coming than we already have on top of COVID.
Right. Yeah. And COVID is only going to make it worse. And so, I think, my institution, we right now have a really great person that's in charge of our counseling services and has worked over the last few years to bring in additional resources, both available virtually, bringing in internships. We don't have a master's program in counseling. And so even we partnered with Missouri State in terms of bringing in interns that can also help provide resources. And so I think, I would encourage all institutions. We could probably do more. I'm not saying we are the gold standard by any stretch of the imagination, but I think, I think within your own institution, encouraging the devotion of more resources, because this is I would almost say we're already at the crisis point, and COVID is highlighting that. I mentioned the girl that the friend of mine who has a sister that's here. She's bright, very, very capable. She quit going to class last semester. And if it weren't for the fact that her sister and brother-in-law are here in town and work on campus, she probably would have failed. And they basically went and got her and took her to their house and said, "You're going to class." And she's I would say a healthy, capable, bright person, and she was struggling. It's just with depression and it's a challenging time. And so I think we've got to just provide more resources towards that.
And being aware and watching for it. Yeah. Okay. I think we're just about up on time here. So let me see what else I have to end up with here. So thank you again, Dr. Steward, for your time on this presentation. We appreciate everything that you shared with us today. Just a reminder to our audience that there will be another survey sent to you later on that we ask for you to comment back on that. Thank you all for your questions to add to the presentation. Those were helpful. We will have about a 10-minute break between this presentation and the next one. And a reminder, you'll need to log out of this one and then go back and connect into the next presentation that you choose to watch. Thank you very much for your time. And thank you, Dr. Steward.
Yeah, thank you guys. I appreciate y'all being here. All right, take care. Bye.